We all know what President Trump wants to do with that swamp thing.
We are going to drain the swamp of government corruption in Washington, D.C. And we are going to keep our promises, all of the promises that we made.
But here's the question. Is a swamp too deep to drain? Our next guest doesn't think so. Here with his strategy is Fox News contributor and the host of the new show, The Next Revolution, with Steve Hilton. Mr. Steve Hilton. By the way, Steve is also the former director of strategy for Prime Minister David Cameron. Wanted to work that in. Of course, out on the campaign, then candidate Donald Trump started talking about drain the swamp. I think initially he thought it was kind of a corny expression, but it really has resonated with people.
Yeah, he didn't really love the phrase, but the idea, which is Washington, D.C. isn't working.
Right.
It's all controlled by lobbyists and donors and officials who've been there forever. And that's why change isn't happening. That's what drain the swamp, the idea meant. And once people heard the phrase, they really understood the kind of changes that the president wanted to bring.
Okay, so let's talk about how to drain the swamp. First step, Washington, D.C. By the way, when people refer to the swamp, back in the old days, the National Mall where they built that was actually a swamp, and so that's where the expression comes from.
So, Steve, the first thing that we got to think about is something actually that President Trump has already started to deal with, which is the lobbyists.
Okay.
Here are the lobbyists. They are concentrated in this area. There's a street called K Street.
Yeah.
And around that area,
through the middle.
Through there, that's where they all live and work and hang out and do their deals. All the things that people think of when they think about the swamp. The lobbyists at the heart of it. Now, the president's already announced executive orders to clamp down on lobbying. That's good news, but it's just the start, because actually the swamp is much bigger than just lobbying. You've got the federal bureaucracy.
Sure.
So a lot of those big federal agencies, they're based there along Pennsylvania Avenue between the Capitol and the White House.
Federal triangle right there.
Exactly. And the thing is that the next steps, you see, from draining the swamp, after he's dealt with the lobbyists, let's just get rid of that. Can you
push that X one more time? All right.
There we are.
All right.
The next steps.
There we go.
Very good.
Technology.
There we go. So the next steps are. The next step, after dealing with the lobbyists, is the federal bureaucracy itself. These are the people, the officials, who've been in their positions for year after year after year. They've got their own agenda. And actually, if you want to really bring change, he's got to change those agencies. That's not enough to just say, do this, not that.
Right.
In my experience, having worked in government, trying to do this kind of thing, the only way to deal with it is you just have to get rid of those people.
Well, the problem...
You have to fire them. And that is not easy, because there's lots of rules, there's the unions, there's all sorts of things that they need to get over. And then the final thing, in terms of draining the swamp, the next step is here, is actually thinking about what goes on in Congress. The fact that so many of the decisions there are really controlled by the donors, the big donors that Trump spoke about in the campaign. Do you remember he talked about how they're puppets of the donors?
Sure.
He's got to do something about that too.
Tell Congress to ignore the donors. The donors are where they get the money, and members of Congress run for re-election every 2 years. They need the donors.
They do, but honestly, the president is not going to succeed in draining the swamp unless he does something about the way that big money controls politics. It's a really tough battle, but they're the three steps. Lobbyists, getting rid of the bureaucrats, doing something about the donors in Congress. That's draining the swamp.
Look at that. So you make it sound so easy, but daunting. All right.
Thanks,
Steve
Steve.
Hilton, thank you very much for joining us live.